21st February 2003. Like every evening at the Hotel Metropole in Hong Kong, the lobby is packed with tourists and business people. A doctor who has just traveled across the border steps into the elevator to head to his room. He feels a little unwell, maybe suffering from a common cold or a slight fever. As the doors close, he coughs slightly into his hand, presses the elevator button, and walks down the long carpeted hallway to room 911. It is a completely mundane moment. It is nothing the hotel staff or other guests haven't seen 1,000 times before. But in a matter of hours, the invisible microscopic particle left behind in that single hotel hallway will suddenly ignite a global chain reaction. The virus will silently spread to other guests on the floor. Those guests will then pack their bags, travel to the international airport, and board commercial flights to Toronto, Singapore, and Hanoi. Tracing a single isolated cough to a catastrophic global outbreak was an unprecedented puzzle. It led medical investigators down a desperate, month-long rabbit hole until they eventually discovered a unique physical phenomenon, completely unknown in virology up until this point, that allowed the disease to behave in mysterious, terrifying ways. Even in a massive global outbreak, the evidence does not just disappear. Hospitals, airports, and border controls usually collect enough digital data in time to leave behind a scene full of clues that can lead investigators straight to the source. By systematically narrowing down the search to the countries and cities with the most infections, epidemiologists can start looking at the fine details. A virus naturally spreads outwards from person to person. So when an outbreak starts in a single town, it creates a distinct, predictable pattern. It slowly widens out as family members infect their coworkers and coworkers infect their neighbors. If the infected person travels to a nearby city, it creates a slightly different map, but the human connections remain clear. In a small, simple outbreak that gets put out early, these infection patterns usually point towards an obvious source: a specific local market, a shared water well, or a single restaurant. But since the disease spread to multiple countries at the exact same time, these infection patterns start blending together into a chaotic mess. On top of that, a virus can get pulled towards global transit hubs like international airports or high-speed train stations, where the massive flow of human bodies helped the outbreak grow exponentially. This can leave some distant cities looking far more damaged and infected than the actual source of the disease. If a standard medical interview does not point towards an obvious source, the investigators will look towards the digital data: credit card swipes, hotel bookings, passport scans, and cell phone power pings. By analyzing this data and comparing the timelines of sick patients, investigators can build up an image of which areas started burning with the infection first. This does not give a definitive result immediately, but it can help lead them closer to a possible source. But what happens when an outbreak completely defies all these rules? Now, high-speed global transmission wasn't completely uncommon. In fact, in the decade before 2003, seasonal flu regularly crossed borders. People often broke quarantine rules and would travel just before their symptoms got severe. But these outbreaks would almost always burn out slowly or be contained by local doctors. So, why did this specific incident go from a single sick passenger to an enormous global crisis in just a matter of hours? When investigators finally traced the digital footprint back to the Hotel Metropole in Hong Kong, they noticed something very wrong. A large number of international guests had all become sick on the exact same night. Normally, a virus like this would be very hard to pass on without direct contact, but this hotel was full of travelers coming and going, constantly opening and closing doors, and moving through the enclosed corridors. The investigators tested the environmental crews on the 9th floor of the Hotel Metropole. They swabbed the carpets, the elevator buttons, and the walls. They found that the virus survived easily on these surfaces, seeding a chain of infections that would soon board international flights. But the true terror of this disease wasn't fully understood until a few weeks later, when the virus hit Amoy Gardens, a massive, densely packed apartment complex in Hong Kong. Hundreds of residents were becoming infected at an impossible rate, and direct contact could not explain it. To determine how the virus was moving so aggressively, investigators used advanced computational fluid dynamics to simulate the complex plumbing and airflow. The result was astonishing. The simulations proved that the virus was moving through the building's drainage pipes. When exhaust fans were turned on, the viral load was pulled out of the pumping, aerosolized, and carried by the wind currents directly into neighboring apartment towers. The air itself had become a super spreader event. But the investigation did not stop in Hong Kong. The doctor who coughed in the hotel and the virus that swept through the apartment. These were just the amplifiers. To find the true patient zero, investigators had to push the timeline even further back. They traced the doctor's steps before he arrived in Hong Kong, following the medical data across the border into mainland China. They had to peel back months of hospital records, looking for strange anomalies that had been missed or misunderstood. And finally, they found it. Months before the global panic, on 16th of November 2002, in the city of Foshan, a man named Pan Zhuoyao became severely ill. At the time, local doctors simply diagnosed him with ordinary pneumonia. They had absolutely no idea they were looking at a brand new, highly infectious disease. He is the true patient zero, the very first known human case of the outbreak. But why spend months tracing millions of digital footprints just to find one person? Finding patient zero is never about placing blame. The person who starts an outbreak is almost always an innocent victim, completely unaware of the threat they carry. Instead, finding them is about assessing the source code of the disease. When scientists finally pinpoint the very first case in Foshan, they could figure out exactly where the virus came from. It directed them to the local animal markets in Guangdong province, where exotic meats were heavily traded. By analyzing the biological evidence, virologists eventually traced the ultimate source: colony of horseshoe bats living in a remote cave systems. These bats carried the virus naturally without getting sick. However, the virus did not jump directly from a bat to patient zero. It required an intermediate stepping stone. When infected bats overlapped with masked palm cives, animals that were later brought into the densely packed, highly trafficked environment of live animal markets, the virus found a perfect conditions to mutate. It adapted to infect the respiratory tracts of the human handling or buying the animals, triggering a devastating tsunami spillover. Finding patient zero was the key to unlock this entire biological chain. It gave scientists the genetic blueprint they needed to understand the pathogen's mechanics, engineer a vaccine, and ultimately break the chain of infection. This terrifying global hunt was a massive wake-up call. It led to brand new safety improvements worldwide, from replacing old ventilation systems in hospitals to implementing digital contact tracing and thermal scanners at international airports. All of these are designed to catch the next outbreak before it ever boards a flight. Thank you for watching.